Welcome to today's episode where we take a brief glimpse into the furry Space Marines. Yep, we're talking about the Space Wolves, the galaxy's very own Viking wannabes. They're well known for being barbarians and not following the Codex Astartes because fuck Guilliman. But despite all this, they're hella loyal to the Emperor. Of course, there's the tiny detail where they sometimes cosplay as a dog like it's a full-on furry convention. Oh, and when they're not busy howling at the moon, they might casually engage in a little flesh eating. But don't worry, they're eating people for strategic reasons. Apparently, devouring someone's flesh also lets you download their battle plans. Games Workshop was definitely on some next-level meth when they cooked this up. Anyway, before they found their gloriously unhinged Primarch, Leman Russ, the Space Wolves were just the 6th Legion, made up of a bunch of hyper-violent Terra tribesmen infused with Russ's gene seed. A decade into the Great Crusade, the Emperor finally decided to unleash the beasts, and the galaxy got a taste of them. These guys were commanded by the Emperor himself, probably because even he wasn't sure they wouldn't turn on their own allies if left unsupervised. They ended up earning a reputation as the Emperor's personal squad of murder puppies. Of course, Big E couldn't babysit the 6th Legion forever. I mean, he had a whole galaxy to unite, right? Their real dad, Leman Russ, was somewhere out there on the death world of Fenris. It's a planet of fire and ice that can't decide if it wants to roast you alive or freeze you into a popsicle. Extreme winter, extreme summer, and zero chill. Resources were limited, and the only solution was non-stop tribal warfare. Anyway, after the baby Primarchs got yeeted across the galaxy by chaos, Russ crash-landed on Fenris. A giant she-wolf finds him, and he's raised as a feral wolf child. Honestly, the guy would probably fit right in at a furry convention, except instead of awkward cosplay, he's out there actually living the dream. But then tragedy struck. A bunch of hunters took down Wolf Mommy, and Russ responds in typical Primarch fashion by killing a dozen of them with his bare hands. The tribesmen, understandably impressed by the fact that this 5-year-old kid just turned a dozen hunters into salsa, brought him back to their king. The king proceeded to adopt him. From there, Russ did what every model Primarch does, brought the planet together with a flawless combo of charm and a ridiculous amount of overcompensating violence. It's all part of the Primarch starter pack, unless you're Angron, who managed to get himself enslaved like a total NPC. Anyway, the Emperor's scrolling through Reddit when he reads about a ridiculously OP wolf king on a backwater planet and realized it might be his son. He shows up disguised as a homeless stranger and requests Russ to bow down to the master of mankind. Russ obviously refuses. And so, a contest equivalent to the Primarch Olympics begin. The first 2 events? Competitive eating and drinking. Russ, channeling his inner obese drunkard, absolutely wrecks the Emperor. However, the last challenge was a duel, which basically guaranteed Russ was going to take the L, and that's exactly what happened. After getting his cheeks clapped by Big E, he pledges his allegiance to his real father. Russ was then given control of the 6th Legion and renamed them the Space Wolves, and Fenris was designated as their home world. In the early days of the Great Crusade, things were so rough for the Space Wolves that most of their Terran recruits got yeeted out of existence. So, they needed fresh recruits to replenish their numbers. From that point on, all new blood was picked from Fenris. The Wolf Priests would head out on scouting trips, looking for the most swole or heroic dudes to hit with the Space Viking job offer. Then, these lucky recruits got to face the ultimate challenge, way worse than Dark Souls on max difficulty. It was known as the Test of Mordecai. This delightful process starts with them getting injected with the Canis Helix gene. And yes, they asked for consent first. They weren't that crazy. After that, they're tossed into the wilderness, stark naked, where they've got to survive sub-zero temperatures and enough predatory beasts to make National Geographic cry, all while trying not to go full furry from the curse of the Wolfen. You see, the Canis Helix gene is the ultimate double-edged sword. On the plus side, it soups up the Space Wolves beyond even your standard Space Marine stats. We're talking superhuman senses, like being able to smell an enemy from a mile away, or hear you open a bag of chips in another galaxy. They also get badass elongated fangs and skin tougher than your mom's overcooked turkey, and sometimes their hair goes full silver fox and their eyes turn yellow. Now the drawback is that sometimes these guys get way too committed to their doggy roleplay and end up going full wolf mode. We're talking about 100% feral, barking at the moon, humping your leg insane. They lose all chill, can't tell friend from foe, and basically just want to snack on raw meat and guzzle blood, kind of like the Blood Angels with their red thirst. And sure, if you're into questionable hobbies like bestiality, maybe you count this as a win. But for everyone else, it's less spiritual awakening and more who the fuck let the dogs out. The Space Wolves are a stubborn pack of dogs. These guys have an allergic reaction to authority and basically treat the Imperium's command structure like a set of IKEA instructions, completely optional. Still, they love to think of themselves as the Emperor's ultimate murder machines, and they're proud of it too. While chapters like the Ultramarines are out there playing SimCity, building empires and kissing babies, the Wolves were engineered for one thing: destruction. If the Emperor points, they pounce, ready to tear apart anything or anyone in the way, including other Space Marines. The Space Wolves also have this whole barbaric beast stereotype slapped on them, like they're just a bunch of beer-chugging cavemen. And boy, do they love drinking. But surprise, surprise, that's all part of the act. In reality, these guys are pulling off some serious 500 IQ plays, just pretending to be space Vikings gone wild. Sure, they love running around smashing stuff and getting drunk, but behind all that rowdy behavior is a brain operating at a tactical level. No one expects these wild clansmen to pull off military maneuvers, but they are constantly analyzing their surroundings and have combat instincts sharper than their fangs. Enemies take one look and think that it'd be an easy win since they're big dumb brutes, only to find themselves getting outsmarted by a pack of wolves playing 4D chess. Underestimation is the wolves' secret weapon, and it's been working for 10,000 years. During the Horus Heresy, the Space Wolves were not present during the Siege of Terra. Instead, Big E gave Russ and his wolf pack a completely different task, which was to fetch Magnus from his homeworld of Prospero. Why? Well, it turns out that Magnus made a slight oopsie on his last visit to Terra. He was just trying to be a good son, warning the Emperor about Horus being a traitor, but in classic Magnus fashion, he went a bit overboard. Instead of delivering the message, he accidentally punched a massive hole right through the webway, basically destroying the Emperor's golden throne, which was the equivalent of Big E's Lamborghini. Magnus knew he was in deep shit and couldn't even bring himself to warn the Emperor about Horus, so he ran like a bitch. Now, the Emperor's exact orders were to retrieve Magnus, but the now corrupted Horus was an elite hacker and intercepted the message telling Russ to kill Magnus and his 1,000 sons. So, the Space Wolves descend upon Prospero, and Leman Russ wrecks Magnus in a 1v1, shattering his soul. Unfortunately, Magnus is a bitch and runs away again, this time into the Eye of Terror. After all that drama, Russ rallied the Space Wolves for a showdown against his traitorous brother, Horus. They went full balls to the wall, launching an all-out assault on Horus' flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Armed with the gloriously overpowered spear of Russ, he actually wiped the floor with Horus. But just when he was about to deliver the final blow, good old Russ hesitated because he still clung to that ridiculous notion that maybe Horus could be redeemed. Horus seized the opportunity and dealt a fatal blow to Russ. As their leader crumpled, the Space Wolves rushed in like a bunch of loyal puppies, sacrificing themselves left and right just to buy enough time for their brothers to drag Russ back to safety. It was a noble effort, but in the aftermath, the Space Wolves were essentially crippled for the remainder of the Horus Heresy. After the heresy, Leman Russ was angry at himself for not being at the Siege of Terra to aid the Emperor. In his shame, he personally led a force into the Eye of Terror in the hopes of revenge. Eventually, he disappeared altogether, pledging to return in the final battle. Nobody knows where the fuck he went. He's probably hanging out in the Games Workshop's creative meeting room, biding his time until their stocks tank, and they need to drop a shiny new Leman Russ model to boost sales. With Big Daddy Russ MIA, the Space Wolves became prime targets for some intergalactic revenge. In particular, the 1,000 Sons had beef with them ever since the burning of Prospero. And Magnus, our favorite know-it-all, had been holding on to that grudge. But in true Magnus fashion, the pettiness ran deeper than it looked. He wasn't just looking to kick the wolves in the teeth. He had grander plans. His true goal was making sure the Space Wolves never got a part 2, no spin-offs, no sequel, no second founding. That would be a serious issue for future traitor legions. So he gathered his Chaos Bros and rolled up to Fenris for the Battle of the Fang. When the dust cleared, only 22 Space Wolves were left standing, but they successfully defended Fenris. However, they lost all their experimental material for the planned projects for successor chapters. Thus, the Space Wolves got neutered and would never have any more puppies. Magnus had succeeded in hindering their ability to spread and grow in power. For the Thousand Sons, they got creamed, doggy style. Their legion had thrown almost everything at the battle and lost almost as much. Their fleet and space marine resources were used up and cast away. Several of the remaining senior figures in the legion were lost, and Magnus himself disappeared. It's only in more recent times that the Space Wolves have reobtained their ability to become a puppy mill and spawned successor chapters. The Space Wolves decided that following the Codex Astartes was just too mainstream. Instead of boring, regimented squads, these guys run in packs. Each pack will be made up of Space Marines, who have fought together for some time and will work together to sniff and sound out their enemies. The Wolves have their own special pack types too. You've got the Bloodclaws, the Grey Hunters, the Long Fangs, and the Wolf Guard. And then there's the Wolf Scouts, who are basically the weird cousins of the group. Bloodclaws are the newbies of the Space Wolves chapter and the equivalent of a neophyte. They're still struggling how to control their inner rage because of the curse of the Wolfen. Think of them as teenagers with superhuman strength and a fondness for stabbing things up close. Subtlety isn't their strong suit, but who needs that when you can rip enemies apart in hand-to-hand combat? If they don't get themselves killed by, well, being themselves, these rage-fueled pups might just grow up into the Grey Hunters, basically Space Wolves who finally learned how to adult. The Grey Hunters are your seasoned warriors. They make up most of the Space Wolves' numbers. The Long Fangs form a group of veteran warriors within the chapter. They are literal werewolf elders because as they age, these Space Wolves develop long, gnarly canines and gray hair. But don't let the dad bods fool you. These veterans are trusted with the big guns, which should tell you everything about their skill level. They are disciplined and steady and are rarely shocked by any catastrophic event. Then there's the Wolf Guard. These aren't your run-of-the-mill veterans like in other chapters. To become one of these elite warriors, you've got to pull off something truly epic, like slaying a mountain-sized Xenos with a spoon. Once you've proven yourself, you get to wear the fanciest gear the chapter has to offer, including the infamous Terminator armor. And if you're really lucky, you might even be nominated to become a Wolf Lord. There's also Wolf Scouts, who basically are the loner kids of the class you gotta watch out for. They don't like making friends, so they yearn the open space and isolation of the Fenrisian tundra. These dogs are let loose and allowed to become scouts to provide reconnaissance and disrupt enemy movements and logistics. And obviously at the top, we have the Wolf Lords, who are the alpha dog of each pack. Each one leads one of the 12 great companies. The Wolf Lords are just a step below the ultimate boss, the Great Wolf, who is the chapter master in Leman Russ's absence. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. If there's any specific 40K lore, topics, or conversations you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to drop a comment below.